Hello, and welcome to the Brave New Weed podcast. And now, here's your host, Joe Dolce.
Thank you, listeners, for coming back to the next episode of the Brave New Weed podcast. I'm Joe Dolce. I'm the author of Brave New Weed, and I'm here with my co-host, Matthew Hendershot.
Hey, Joe. How you doing today?
I'm excited. I know we have a great show tonight, so I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, very excited about the content. I know we juggled some stuff around to sort of push this out as soon as we completed the interview.
So. Well, we were really lucky. We got a great interview with Congressman from Oregon, Earl Blumenauer, who's been fighting for cannabis legalization for over 40 years. And he has a lot to say about the importance of this, because at some point, it can seem like a very minor issue. But Earl is incredible. He's dedicated, he's smart, and he is convinced that no president will ever be elected in America who does not support cannabis legalization from now going forward, which is really interesting.
It sounds really good. It sounds slightly ambitious, seeing how things are currently seated, but I wouldn't be surprised at all. I think we're looking at, 3 years until things hopefully are changed up. And at that point, hopefully we've made some more progress and we can sort of put this little regression episode behind us.
I think Earl is nothing but a realist. I wouldn't call him a blind-eyed optimist, okay? So I think we have maybe something to listen to about him. And we also have Joe Bondy, who's the lawyer who attempted to sue Jeff Beauregard Sessions to get the Controlled Substance Act changed, to get marijuana out of Schedule 1.
Well, speaking of, why don't we just jump right into some news? Hey listeners, we want to thank you guys for joining us each and every episode, and we want you to know that we're listening to you too. Please email us at bravenewweedcast@gmail.com with any of your comments, questions, or anything, just to say hi. We'd love to hear from you.
So a few weeks ago, a lawyer friend of ours, Joe Bondy, brought a lawsuit against the federal government and Jeff Beauregard Sessions in particular, suing them to take cannabis out of Schedule 1, which is the most restrictive drug category that any substance can fall under. He and 5 or 6 plaintiffs, one of whom is a 12-year-old girl with a terrible and chronic epileptic condition that only cannabis can treat, led the case. And I went and heard the litigation in the federal appeals court in New York City, and I walked into a packed courtroom, and it was an amazing experience. We're lucky enough to have Joe Bondy join us tonight to tell us the result of that argument and what the future lies for getting cannabis out of Schedule 1. Joe Bondy, I saw you in court a few weeks ago, bringing a lawsuit against Jeff Beauregard Sessions, and the U.S. government, I believe, right? Tell us about what prompted this suit and what your experience was in court. But let's start with what prompted the suit, please.
Well, I mean, Joe, when we first met, we hadn't, the legal team hadn't thought of this lawsuit, and you had written Brave New Weed, which was the culmination. It's kind of like, why'd you write the book, It's the culmination of decades worth of forward momentum towards legalization. And the marijuana laws, I think most of the country believes, are draconian and unjust and often lead to lengthy sentences and dramatic collateral consequences for those convicted. And so it was the culmination of years worth of fomenting and thinking and work towards a more moral society. Nothing really more than that.
That's a pretty high ambition, I have to say. But what were the forces that came together that enabled you to bring this suit?
Well, I think that the temperature rising, if you will, got us to a point of enough kinetic energy that lawyers like myself, like Michael Hiller, like David Holland, like Lauren Rudick, could get together and be in a position to bounce ideas off each other in a way that made sense. And also to have plaintiffs who wanted to bring an action, who had been aggrieved by the marijuana laws.
Well, the most amazing plaintiff was this 12-year-old girl, correct?
Well, I don't know. I mean, she's the most vocal. You got a 7-year-old kid, too, with Lay's disease, Jagger-Cote. Yeah. And it's not, and then you've got Jose Bellin and PTSD, a combat veteran who literally was there for the invasion of Iraq and just wants to treat with cannabis and speaks on behalf of all the other veterans in the country. But Alexis Portell, who's now 12, almost 13, is a very courageous, articulate, well-spoken advocate for this movement, and certainly she became, as the case evolved, really the marquee plaintiff. We started out with the name Washington v. Sessions, right? We're going to Washington v. Sessions with Marvin Washington.
Marvin Washington, a football player, right? Yep.
Plaintiff, but over time, the public opinion really tended to focus on the younger plaintiffs and on the need for minors with these types of medical conditions to take life-saving medicine.
It's not unlike the shooting, the most recent shooting in Florida, when the young kids who were in that school went and confronted congressmen. It was basically game up, right? Game over, guys. We are 17 years old. You are not going to shoot us up anymore.
Think about what happened with this. The first thing that happened is you had these bizarre alt-right conspiracy theorists coming out and maligning the students. Oh, that's, a lot of people in the marijuana movement have been subject to stigmatization.
Yep.
Then you've got political waxing and waning cycles and what appears to be a diminution in interest even, 8 or 9 days later. So I am optimistic that the children in America will keep up the pressure and make our world a better place. I really say that it's a tragedy that it takes the children to do that. But even with respect to, gun legislation, it's not such an easy landing zone.
No, it's not at all. Not at all. So I came and I saw you in court making the first arguments. Come on, that courtroom was packed in New York City.
Well, here's the thing. I am honored. I can't tell you how honored I was personally as a lawyer to come into that Southern District of New York, which is the building in which I became gray and silver haired, right? Through the
and still looking fine, I must say.
And there's like a rally outside the courthouse, and it's our people. And then the metal detector line, it's like our people. I see you there through the window as I'm coming in. And then I get to the courtroom, and I don't realize entirely the impact of it. I wander into a jam-packed federal district courtroom, and I get a round of applause. I get literally applauded. And I then shook everyone's hand. I was so touched and awed. So the experience of it and the energy of us being together and what we brought together was really momentous. We had, I think, over 1 billion social media hits and views in relation to the case.
Great. I mean, that New York Times piece didn't hurt either. It was very good. But so what's
that's like public opinion, Joe? That's not necessarily winning the lawsuit. However,
I understand.
We got to court. We had a really, even though we ended up losing a couple days ago, which we'll get to, but we had a really extraordinary gift from the judge, which was him on the record, so to speak, stating that medical cannabis had absolutely saved our minor plaintiffs' lives and that it was indisputable. And that statement by a United States district judge was profound. It was the strongest statement in favor of medical cannabis we've ever had. It'll resonate far beyond the case. And when we ended up losing the principal claim, it wasn't on the merits, but rather because we hadn't exhausted this spurious, futile remedy with the DEA, the exhaustion of the rescheduling petition.
Can you explain that a little bit in deep? Because nobody I know understood it. So can you just explain it, please?
Generally, if there's a statute, as there is, the Controlled Substances Act, which sets up a model for it to be reviewed, or for a substance that's contained in the act, any drug, to be rescheduled from Schedule 2 to 3 or 1 to 5 or whatever it may be, an individual has to petition the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, for rescheduling.
Yep.
The DEA then takes relevant information, brings it to the FDA. These petitions are, for example, in the case of, say, John Getman, who brought a petition with High Times in 1995. 256 pages was his petition. And so you bring it, you then wait a couple of years on average for the FDA merely to take your data and begin to, assemble what amounts to, in every case so far, an argument against you. And then bouncing on back to DEA, you get a recommendation on average 6.5 years later, in every case denying the rescheduling of cannabis. And so what we'd argued in the last petition took 9 years and required there to be a writ of mandamus, which is a Latin term meaning a writ to compel the government to do something. 9 years last time, and the filing of
9 years.
Right before ultimately the DEA, when the writ of mandamus was pending, denied the rescheduling petition, the last one filed by Americans for Safe Access. And so the judge in our case said, but guys, there's this administrative, petitioning process, and you have not exhausted it, and therefore I have to rule against you. We have this issue squarely framed for a direct appeal in the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, Joe, on the question of, but here's an agency that is predisposed against us, that is prejudiced in deciding the matter, and the administrative remedy process here would be futile, particularly given the fact that our minor plaintiffs would be long gone by the time the petition was, again, denied.
Joe, I would say the process, rather than exhausting the process is exhausting us. The process is impossible. It's an impossible bar to hurdle. No.
Forward. First off, guys like you and I, Joe, who are on the edge of this movement now, right? Not so much, but we're getting there. Are buoyed up by the extraordinary enthusiasm of these millennial people who are spot on with drug policy and passionate about what they're doing, and who have impelled me forward through the course of the past, year and a half or so. And so we've got great support. We don't need to kill ourselves. We need to apply pressure and momentum and not give up and not relent and get up from this last, loss in the district court and take it really for the victory that it represents.
Yeah.
But maybe because you were in the argument, the judge persisted with the government, the lawyer for the defendants here, on the issue of expedited review. And although we lost on this point of go to the DEA and have your, rescheduling petition decided, the judge made a big deal out of how there was no means to expedite the review of those petitions. And so perhaps what now comes of this case, while even on direct appeal, is a means for other people to pursue a rescheduling petition and to utilize the transcript of our hearing and our decision here in this case and whatever comes out in the circuit to compel the Drug Enforcement Administration to actually take an expedited review of a rescheduling petition in light of 2018 and all the medical evidence that's been adduced, and whether it's the recent Tikkun Olam study, which is a double-blind clinical trial, or any other trial, and to push this issue forward in a way now that we didn't have available to us before this case and before the judge's rule.
So will you be in court again soon?
Well, the next step is not as dramatic. I mean, we're on the scene. We're going to be filing a direct appeal. I believe we'd thought perhaps moving to reconsider the judge on a couple points. I was most disappointed, Joe, that I didn't get to argue my beloved equal protection point. And I didn't get to argue on behalf of the CCA with respect to the nexus of Nixon, the executive, to the Controlled Substances Act, and indeed how our members have been aggrieved, and they can literally have those grievances and real injuries redressed by the court. So I was personally upset I didn't get a chance to speak really meaningfully in the proceeding. My daughter pointed out I got to say the word misdemeanor, but I had thought perhaps we'd file a motion to reconsider the judge's rulings. I'm not sure. The legal team is really kind of turning over our options, but at very least, we will have what's called a direct appeal to the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. It's basically in the same building we were in, except on a higher floor. And that appeals court will then decide whether indeed this administrative process is futile, as we argue it is, whether indeed our laws were grounded in bigotry, as we've argued they are, and whether they've been applied in such a manner since. So we'll be in court. But the reality is that the time we spend in court is going to be elved by the time we spend briefing the subject and researching it and putting together our appeal.
Got it. Okay, final question. What happens to 12-year-old, 13-year-old Alexis Bedell right now? I mean, she's not going to get her medicines. I mean, she now lives in a legal state. I know that, but
not able to fly. She's not able to travel. She can't take advantage of the same beaches and monuments and parks that other children can. She's shackled. It's like her father said during the press conference after the proceeding. You tell your kids there's no boogeyman and you can do anything, but that's not true in her case. And so the next step is this. Thank God she's in Colorado. And thank God that right now, notwithstanding the rescission of the Cole Memorandum, she is still able to receive her medicine. But I think the next step for her to get expedient relief would be, again, to push that issue of an expedited review of a DEA rescheduling petition. And so perhaps that's the next step for her and Jagger Cote and Jose Belen and everybody else involved in this case, is to take what we now have that we never had before and turn it around on the agency and push them to review something in a fraction of 9 years.
Joe Bondy, you're my hero. Thank you so much for doing this. We all thank you, I think. It's just great. I'm glad that the loss is not making you suffer.
No, we can't. We got to keep getting up and moving forward, and we're going to win. Joe, thank you so much for everything you're doing.
Pleasure.
Joe, it's unfortunate to hear that the decision did go the way that it went, but it's fascinating to me that many of the things that Joe Bondy spoke about, which are, he almost sort of indicated at this great moment of passing the torch with the younger people coming in. You guys speaking about, the parallels between the young people getting activated from the tragic shooting in Florida and how we have young people now activated in the cannabis movement. And that speaks true to the CCA, who was a party to this.
Cannabis Cultural Association.
Yeah, and also great to know that, Marvin Washington, former guest of the Brave New Weed podcast, Jacob Plowden of CCA, former guest of, we seem to be running in a good group of people.
I think we know some people who are really trying to move the needle, which really brings us to our main guest this evening, who's Congressman Earl Blumenauer. Now, Earl is from Oregon, and he was actually in the Oregon legislature when cannabis was voted to be decriminalized in the 1970s. And this guy has been fighting this battle for the last 40 years, okay? And that is a long time. And he has seen the ups and he has seen the downs. And he's generous enough to give us some time this evening, Matthew, to really talk about what he sees as the future for this. And I think his opinions are really worth listening to. Let's listen to our conversation with Congressman Earl Blumenauer. Earl, I'm so glad you're joining us tonight. I mean, I know you're known for public transportation issues and riding bicycles and also wearing bow ties. But I wanted to ask you, you've been supporting marijuana legalization for a very long time. How long has it been, and how did you get into this game?
Well, I was in the Oregon legislature when Oregon became the first state to decriminalize marijuana back in the 70s. Just about 4 years before New York decriminalized. It was a fascinating policy issue for me because at the same time we were also considering whether or not we would legalize the right for people to grow marijuana for personal consumption. It was a spirited debate, but characterized, I think, by very forceful presentations about how the policy of prohibition for marijuana made absolutely no sense.
No sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was, in fact, there was one of the most memorable speeches I've ever heard. It was given by a gentleman, an older legislator, a Republican from rural eastern Oregon. He was a hog farmer who I don't think had ever smoked or drank, and he didn't use foul language, and he was just kind of a straight arrow guy. But he started this presentation. He held up a package of cigarettes. I don't know that he'd ever held a cigarette before. And he said, this is perfectly legal. It's highly addictive, and it kills hundreds of thousands of people a year. And it's readily available to anybody at that time over 16. He took a bottle of Jim Beam and thumped it on his table and said, this alcohol for some people is highly addictive. It leads to really dangerous behavior. Some people damage their health. Perfectly legal. We kill people on the highways with drunk drivers. And then as he goes through this litany, he held up a joint in a baggie and said, "This is a marijuana cigarette. It's not going to kill you. It's not highly addictive, and it can get you put in jail." And it was brilliantly done. In fact, I was told that if the 19 of us who voted to legalize marijuana for personal use had been joined by the people who voted no but smoked dope, Oregon would have been the first state to legalize adult use.
It is amazing that this debate has been I mean, the Carter administration was, this close to decriminalizing in the 1970s. And then I can't remember who it was, got busted for cocaine, and that was the end of that. He was not doing well with the election with Ronald Reagan. But it's amazing that it's been going on for so long, and the argument hasn't really changed. It hasn't needed to change because the facts are the facts are the facts. Aren't you amazed?
It's perplexing and frustrating. But I will tell you that having literally been working on this for more than 40 years, I am, on one hand, I would have thought that we would have gotten through this and that all states would be able to treat marijuana like alcohol. But we ran into the buzzsaw of the war on drugs and the Just Say No campaigns. But in the last 7 years now, progress has just exploded. We've made up for lost time. We're on the edge of actually making that transition to treating it like alcohol. Over 95% of the public has access to some form of state legal marijuana. 9 states have legalized adult use, and the use of medical marijuana is, well, a pollster told me yesterday, we were doing some work just to try and understand the attitudes surrounding this, what we have to do.
Yes.
The pollster said medical marijuana is like the 4th of July. Everybody just accepts and supports it.
That's great. I think of it like the iPad, or the iPhone. Before you had it in your hand, you didn't know what it was what it was capable of doing. But the minute you saw it working, you were saying, "Oh yeah, I want one of these," which is quite interesting. Matthew has a question.
Congressman, I want to ask you, in the past, you've said that we have seen a great deal of growth, and I'm curious how the conversations have changed for you when you deal with opponents of legalization. I'm sure that 40 years ago, it was easy for them to hide behind the myths that have now really been dispelled. What sort of conversations are you getting from opposition on the Hill as to why they think that that the plant should remain illegal and controlled?
Well, it is true. The debate has shifted. I have been pleased to be a part of the debate on legalization and reform literally all over the country, from Maine to California. I've had these conversations in Texas where I think they were probably committing a felony under Texas law just talking to them about marijuana reform. 3 major things have changed. First and foremost, we're watching that average citizens are not sitting back and accepting politicians using this for political purposes the way they were once able to do. People are pushing back. Every one of those initiatives that legalize state adult or medical, with the exception of Vermont, was a result of a vote of the people. This is an example of where the public has sort of helped take control of it.
Yeah, that's true. Yes, absolutely.
That expression of control by people through the political process at the grassroots level adds an air of legitimacy and helps build the momentum. The second thing that is different is that people now have experience with medical marijuana, especially, but it's not something that's limited to college students or aging hippies. There are 20 million people a month in this country who use marijuana. It's not a majority, but it's a significant number. And people have experience dealing with medical marijuana, which has been a game changer. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people who describe how access to medical marijuana changed their lives or the life of a son or daughter, especially a son or daughter who was a veteran. This really touches people in a very profound way. And the proof is there for anybody to see. It is widely not just accepted, but people understand it. They've seen it themselves. They know somebody, or they have that experience themselves. They know,
yeah, that makes an enormous difference. Yeah,
they know that cannabis can have a profound effect dealing with extreme nausea from chemotherapy, for instance. This is different. There is a wider range of experiences that people have shared.
What's the third reason,
The
Earl?
final difference is that we have watched over the course of the last decade the emergence of a more sophisticated, professional, organized marijuana industry. Some of these outlets look like Apple stores. There are very sophisticated people who are involved with the production, sale, the development of products. They're grown-ups. They are practicing serious business, using serious business methodology
Under a lot of constraints, also, right? No banking regulation, no credit cards, no laws, taxes paid in cash, right? It's quite a difficult business, actually.
It is, what was the people remarked that Fred Astaire did all these magnificent dance routines. Ginger Rogers did the same thing in heels and did it backwards. And I think the analogy holds for our state legal cannabis businesses. I mean, these people have found success, product development, satisfying the needs of consumers, working against the grain, the challenges of securing banking services, the challenges that they face in terms of research, the unfair tax system. They can't deduct their business expenses. So we've watched the emergence of an $8 billion industry, over 200,000 employees, thousands of shops, businesses around the country under very difficult circumstances.
Absolutely. So I have a question for you on the Hill. What's your prediction? So if, say Democrats end up really supporting legal cannabis over the next either election cycle or to the next presidential election, do you think that will incur Republican resistance, or do you think this really is a bridge issue that unites blue and red, perhaps the only issue that unites blue and red? What do you think?
Well, obviously, I would rather have my team in charge, because that will hasten the day that we solve these taxation problems, we solve the problems of banking. We have robust research that we tax, regulate, and legalize. But we've worked very hard, as I think you know, to make sure that I reach out to Republicans who want to work with us. So we have virtually every Democrat now who's supportive of these measures on the floor of the House. And we've got 2, 3 dozen, sometimes more, depending on the proposal, Republicans. So we're watching this trend, and it's going to increase. More and more people are going to make this an issue at the ballot box, and people are either going to get on board or I think they're going to suffer some consequences.
So you think it's an issue that Republicans will join as well? Is that your take on it?
We've reached the point now where it appears that about half the Republican voters support adult use. It's over 2/3 of Democrats and almost that number of independents. But when you get to the point where there's about half the Republicans, and when it comes to medical marijuana, it's over 65%, that kind of changes the equation for individual politicians. And what's interesting about this, as I mentioned, the progress in reforming marijuana has been driven by people at the grassroots who decide, hey, we're going to fix this. It doesn't make any sense to continue a failed policy of prohibition.
But it's going to require a lot of congressional leadership to really change some laws. I don't think this is Trump's bailiwick. I think it's up to Congress to sort of get things moving, get legislation started, get things descheduled. I mean, really get the House in order. Who's going to do that? Are you going to do that? Is Cory Booker going to do that? Who's going to take the charge? There needs to be a leader, don't you think?
We've been doing this in Congress for almost a decade. I organized the Cannabis Caucus. My office has been working with people on both sides of the aisle to develop a broad menu of legislation. And I've introduced with Senator Wyden the most comprehensive legislation that would basically solve all the problems. But we've got 3 dozen other bills in the House and the Senate. And so we're working with those on an individual basis. I am out campaigning with people who are running for the House and Senate based on this issue. I'm working with people to understand that this isn't a freebie. This is an issue that people need to take a stand supporting. I will go to my grave thinking that if Hillary Clinton had been more forthright dealing with marijuana,
I'm with you, man. Yep, I'm with you.
I think she would be president today. I actually did talk to her on a couple of occasions. We organized some political and financial support for her campaign from the industry. And on one level, she understood the issue, but she couldn't or wouldn't articulate it. And I think that was far more than 75,000 votes in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. I think going forward, people are going to be held accountable. There will never be another president elected who is against legalization of cannabis. There will not be. I will wager you.
I love your optimism. I want to ask you this. So you got Trump, who is notorious for not taking a stand on the issue, basically, and seems to be his MO on almost everything, except for all the wrong things from my point of view.
I just don't think he knows what his stance is.
But then you got Sessions, the guy he appoints, who's out there like a crackpot, going backwards in time on his own, like an arrow going backwards. What is going on with these guys? Can you give me some insight here? Because we have been spinning our wheels on this.
I don't think anybody really has a fix on what, if anything, Donald Trump believes or knows. We do have him on record, and anybody can go to YouTube and listen to Donald Trump reassure the voters in Colorado and around the country in October of 2016 that he favored letting the states be able to do what they wanted to do with marijuana.
Yeah, but then his toady Sessions comes in and starts going the other direction.
Well,
I mean, didn't he appoint the guy? Don't they work together?
Well, think about this. I mean, Trump actually was widely rumored as wanting to fire Sessions.
Multiple times.
But he never did it.
But denigrating him. I mean, I think that's a very dysfunctional relationship between the two. But it's also sort of a problem that the Trump administration had. Jeff Sessions, I am positive, did not clear this with the White House. I am also positive that they didn't talk to Treasury. You know, one of the things that is important in terms of dealing with the banking issue is the guidance that the Treasury Department issued under President Obama. It wasn't just the Cole memo, but there was guidance for the Department of Treasury dealing with this access to banking. And I had a chance this last week with Secretary Mnuchin to raise this with him. And he said this was a high concern of theirs. There's no indication that Treasury was consulted before Sessions goes off. But take a step back. What we've been talking about and what you've seen the evidence that the earth has shifted on this issue. It is much different, more broadly supported. We have more support in Congress than ever before. If Jeff Sessions does something that comes down on a state legal marijuana enterprise, I think it's going to galvanize the opposition. I've given probably 500 interviews. And I point out, when I was on the trail in the 9 states that voted on this last year, in 2016 rather, in those 9 states that voted on marijuana, Donald Trump was beaten. Marijuana had more votes than Donald Trump in these 9 states.
Yeah.
Marijuana has a higher favorability rating than Donald Trump.
It says less offensive things, I think, marijuana.
Definitely makes you feel better about yourself as a person.
It definitely makes you feel better as opposed to feel worse about the way the world is heading. I mean, look, part of me feels ridiculous. We're talking about this just shortly after another guy with an assault rifle just mowed down 17 kids in Florida, and Trump suggests arming teachers. So we have fortresses, that schools become fortresses.
Prisons. I think that's a prison.
This seems like a relatively small issue, the legalization of cannabis. It's hard to sort of put it in context with gun violence, income inequality, North Korea, all the other things that seem to the destruction of the environment.
I don't buy that.
Talk to me.
It is not just a simple case of some legalization of marijuana. It's not a third tier issue. Take a step back and think about the things that have torn communities apart. First and foremost, this failed war on drugs has fueled a massive inequity in terms of what it has done to young men of color, especially African Americans. Black Lives Matter. 1 million young men ended up in the industrial prison complex, and they didn't use marijuana more than their white contemporaries. It was the color of their skin and a decision to use it politically. That's had devastating consequences. We've got people.
Yeah, I take your point 100%.
And
yes.
We're dealing with the opioid crisis. I mean, talk about something that is serious and dangerous and addictive. We've handed out oxycodone and these things like Tic Tacs. People are dying. Thousands of people are dying every month. Nobody dies from an overdose of marijuana. And the evidence is powerful that where medical marijuana has been available, there are fewer opioid deaths.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, every state that's been reporting has shown
it
that.
is an opportunity to be able to have the health benefits. I mean, the therapeutic aspects of cannabis is undisputed, and it can be transformational for people, and that's why there are more than 24 states that insisted that it be legalized for medicinal purposes. And if we had used it, we'd have an opportunity to enhance health. And I hear stories about this all the time. All we need to do basically is break the roadblock to having federal recognized research. We could develop more products, benefit more people. There's the economics. You know, we are spending billions of dollars on a failed war on drugs. If we legalize, regulate, and tax it, we will not be having to put all these people in jail and waste $25,000, $35,000, $45,000 a year on them. They can be productive citizens, and we put that money back into the economy.
Earl, it's such common sense that it's indescribable. Obviously, we're all on the same side here, but what more? How many more times do you have to say this to get through the thick heads? I'm just baffled.
Well, I mean, the craziest part to me is when you're talking about these things, you're talking about personal liberty, you're talking about tax and economic growth, and you're talking about free market business. These sound like Republican talking points.
Mutual, it seems to me. Like it's stunning to me that this isn't already into fourth gear.
Well, but these are, I think, fundamental American talking points. It's really not partisan. It'll take a while maybe for Republicans to catch up, but we have this momentum already, and it is common sense. It is something that benefits everybody. But there's so much that we've had to do as a nation. I mean, how long did we have to have the debate about slavery, about the inequity of the way African Americans were treated? I mean, it's still going on. We're in this for the long haul. And what I said at the beginning of our discussion, I am struck. Yes, it took longer to get to this point. As a young guy, when I first started, I thought it would happen faster. But having been around the block and watched what we were doing, fighting this failed war on drugs, watching the progress in less than 10 years is stunning. What other political issue except marriage equality has moved this fast?
Yeah, no, you're correct. You're absolutely correct. Earl, do you use cannabis?
No, I felt one of the reasons I thought I was effective to be able to lead this effort is that I can look anybody in the eye and say, I've never smoked marijuana. And for somebody of my generation in the 60s,
it's very unusual.
People raise an eyebrow. But I have no problem with people who do. It's just something that I have chosen not to. And as long as I am leading this effort and it's not fully legal, I don't want to give anybody any running room to try and undermine my credibility or why I'm doing it. It's not. And as I say, when we get this all legal, when we've 3 or 4 years from now, when we've turned the corner and it's all done, and there will be facilities in Portlandia, I'm happy to celebrate by going in and sampling the wares. But until
yes, sir. That is genius.
Yeah.
I'm so glad to know that. Okay. So we have a date. I'll come out and join you on that date.
Yeah,
okay?
I think so.
I'm going to celebrate with you.
I want to ask, we've got so much going on. Obviously, we're entering into a midterm election cycle. What do you see, or what sort of prediction are you looking forward as the next big bulkhead victory for the legalization process? Like if you could target 2 or 3 goals for us of really where you're zeroing in right now, what sort of things are you looking at?
First and foremost, I want to be involved in the Michigan campaign to legalize. That's the next big legalization effort. And if it gets on the ballot in Missouri, I'll be there as well. But continuing the progress on state legalization, that keeps the momentum going. Second, for me, I want to make sure that all the candidates I work with, because in my spare time, I'm trying to get you a better Congress. I want to make sure they understand and respect the issue and that they're comfortable embracing it. I want to make sure that every politician is encouraged, and I mean strongly encouraged, to take a public stand about what their policies are. How will they vote? What do they believe? What will they do to help move this forward? This is something that is absolutely imperative, is that we make sure that we get people to step forward and be clear. If we do that, that's going to give us the momentum, because I'm looking forward to having my team in charge and have Jerry Nadler be chair of the Judiciary Committee, where we'll have hearings on this. Jerry Nadler supported New York's decriminalization in, I think it was 1977. Jerry is good on this, and he would allow the process to work. Republican leadership has fought us even after we get majority support in the House, and even after we're slowly getting several dozen Republicans joining us. They've refused to allow a full and open debate. They prevented the amendment that I've done with Dana Rohrabacher, Republican from California, the Rohrabacher-Blumenauer amendment that would prevent Jeff from interfering with state legal medical marijuana. I want to make sure that they're held accountable.
What should we as citizens do to help you, other than get our asses out and vote? What else can we do?
I mean, that's part of it. I mean, I've been working with the industry, encouraging them. Every store, shop, and office has by the front door voter registration cards. Have people vote. There's an opportunity. I'm working right now to raise money for the political work I do, to be able to nudge people in the right direction and be able to generate support for people who will support us. It's important for people to engage working for candidates. Once they find out where candidates are, if candidates are on the right side of our issue, they ought to be there to be able to help them. We've got to be grown-ups about the political process. And we have extraordinary power in this election if we do our job right. I think we can be moving towards major efforts at solving these problems in the next Congress, not on a temporary basis, like my Rohrabacher-Blumenauer amendment, but permanently.
You know, we're growing, and we're growing quickly. And one of the ways we're growing is when people share our podcast with people they think might be interested in it. So we want to encourage you to hit that share button and send an episode to somebody you think will find it of interest.
So, Joe, packed full episode regarding politics, and it brings me up to something that I saw recently in the news, which was a little bit of hubbub about this cat, Benjamin Thomas Wolf.
I like this guy. No, I like this guy.
I thought you might.
Yeah, he's running for Congress in Illinois, right? Near Chicago? In
yeah,
Chicago,
it's the 5th district. This is like northern Chicago and northwestern Chicago. So a really populous area of the state of Illinois. probably, judging of all of Illinois, more liberal. There's a lot of young people in that area.
And this is a very modern part of Chicago. Yeah.
So Benjamin Wolf, a Democrat, younger Democrat, running against the incumbent Mike Quigley for his Chicago seat in the Democratic primary, has come out with a provocative, well, some people are calling it provocative. I guess it depends on what side of the situation you're looking at. But he is actively holding a burning joint in front of an artistic recreation of the American flag.
So is this really a provocative thing to do? No, it's ridiculous.
I'm sure some people
will find it provocative.
Jeff Sessions is fucking hand-wringing.
I got to give this guy credit. I mean, I personally... Okay, so I have, as a media consultant, I would say that it might have been a more interesting idea if he had a vaporizer.
Yeah, you would like to see it be a more progressive.
I'd like to make it look more modern. I think the idea, I mean, I'll have to say, the look of this gentleman, whoever has a chance should Google this image of Benjamin Thomas Wolf.
Yeah, he looks very slick.
He's hot. He looks sort of Tom Cruise-y. He's laying back and he's got a thing smoking in his right hand. Now, I understand why he didn't use a vaporizer, because you wouldn't have the smoke. You wouldn't have the drama of it, okay? But I do think in terms of the image of cannabis, which I think is obviously evolving and time for an overhaul, it would have benefited if it was a more modern way of inhaling. However, I have to give him credit. Well, he did this once before. He, in an ad against assault weapons, I think he posed with a rifle, and the ad copy said something like, "These aren't allowed within our city limits, are they?"
Yeah, there was some back and forth about that, and also it's really interesting. This guy's got a background of working with the FBI.
He was an FBI agent.
He was an armed FBI agent, so therefore was restricted, could not smoke pot, and had to carry a gun.
Exactly.
And then went to work for the State Department after that, and it ultimately ended up for a short time in national security.
I think I'd like to talk to this guy.
Yeah, we should definitely try and get him on the show.
He seems like he's had some come to Jesus moment, and Jesus told him, do the right thing.
Yeah, either that or he was always on this side and just had his time in the den of vipers. I'm not sure.
I don't know. I think we're going to have to find out. But it's great that you pulled it out. I think it's a great note to end on.
So the world is changing. Yeah, you don't think that this is a risky maneuver. You think that this is great that he's come out in bold fashion, putting himself out there as officially, air quotes, the cannabis candidate.
Matthew, as Earl Blumenauer said, 70% of the American population thinks it's time to legalize cannabis. This guy's right in tune with the majority of Americans, blue or red.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's wish him a lot of luck.
Well, and I do, and I love the fact, I'll just point out, he went on Fox and Friends to discuss this because it was making a lot of news, and they asked him point blank if he were to win, if he would celebrate by getting high, and he responded,
duh,
definitely.
Be sure to tune in next episode, because there's a really interesting family of doctors we're going to be talking to. It's Dr. Janice Knox and her family. This is a family of physicians who are based, again, in Oregon, which is seemingly like the most interesting and progressive state in my worldview tonight anyway, who were all traditional doctors and who have all changed their practice into working with patients and using cannabis medicines. And this is an amazing story. They are doing fantastic work, and I think they're really worth listening to. Good night, Matthew.
Good night, Joe.
Thanks for listening to the Brave New Weed podcast. This episode and all future episodes are made possible by amazing listeners like yourself. If you like what you've heard, we encourage you to show your support by giving $1 a month for special access and rewards on patreon.com/bravenewweed. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram via @bravenewweed. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/bravenewweed. And remember, you can always find more information about us or information discussed in each episode by pointing your favorite browser to bravenewweed.com.